We remember Maximilien Robespierre as the icy face of the terror, methodical, unbending, the man who fed thousands to the guillotine. But what about his own final hours? What happens when the executioner becomes the condemned? 24 hours that spun the French Revolution on its head. A single day when the most feared figure in France turned into prey. If you value history grounded in solid evidence, subscribe and tell us which city you're watching from. This account draws on original convention, records, and the official courtois report. Now back to the story. On the morning of July 27, 1794, the hall of the National Convention hummed as Robespierre climbed the rostrum. He began a speech, 2 tense hours of warnings about traitors and hidden plots. But something felt off. His voice faltered. His hands shook. The man who once never cracked seemed to splinter before 800 deputies. There is a conspiracy against public liberty, he declared. Yet he named no one. That single omission was fatal. Every listener could hear their own death sentence hiding between his pauses. He rambled about virtue and corruption, enemies lurking in darkness. Familiar themes, yet his delivery stuttered like a warped record. Deputies shifted, whispering behind papers. The feared orator was slipping. By late morning, the address limped to an end, greeted only by a few uncertain claps. Where cheers once thundered, silence now cut deep. One after another, deputies rose to shred him. Tallien branded him a desperate. Bilo Verigny accused him of tyranny. And even Barrère, once loyal, struck the final blow. The incorruptible now stood accused. Applause erupted, but for his downfall, support that had carried him through months of executions collapsed in moments. As noon approached, Robespierre tried to speak again, but nothing came. The man whose words had once sealed thousands of fates was suddenly mute. Down with the tyrant. Broad through the chamber, a vote rushed forward. Robespierre, his brother, Augustine, and 3 allies were under arrest. Only a few Jacobins dared protest. Saint just rose to defend him, shouted down. Couthon pinned to his wheelchair begged in vain. The architects of the terror had become its newest captives. That afternoon the Paris Commune heard of the arrest. These were Robespierre's partisans, the city's municipal muscle, and they refused the decree. Armed guards sped to the Committee of General Security, bursting through the Rue Honor, scattering the centuries and carrying Robespierre off. But where could France's most recognizable face hide? They brought him to the Hôtel de Ville, City Hall, which instantly turned into both refuge and snare. Doors were barricaded, sentries posted, yet the building squatted in open view at the heart of Paris. No alleys, no secret exits. By early evening, he sat in a drab office, ringed by 200 National Guards loyal to the Commune, while outside the convention, soldiers masked, thousands of boots, gun carriages, rattling on the stones. The former master of France now depended on an improvised garrison. Friends urged him to flee. Boats waited on the Seine, horses beyond the gates. He hesitated, frozen. Was it pride, faith in the people, or a grim realization there was nowhere to run? Every town kept a guillotine. Every mayor knew his face. Flight would only trade a quick blade for a slow death. As twilight deepened, troops surrounded City Hall. General Barrès commanded 6,000 men, cannon already sighted on the doors, but holding back to spare 5 years of revolutionary record stored inside. Then François Henriot arrived, commander of Paris's guard and Robespierre's fiercest ally, the man who had once cleared the convention with artillery. If anyone could save him, it was Henriot. But he reeled in drunk, ruinously drunk, seeing their leader sway. Soldiers drifted away. Some slipped into alleys, others defected outright. Hour by hour, the commune's strength drained. Night fell and the convention declared Robes an outlaw, an old statute meaning instant death, without trial. The law he'd used on others now hovered over him. Town criers shouted the order, handbills plastered walls, and a bounty of 15,000 livres promised his head, dead or alive. Paris became a hunting ground, and Robbie was the prey. By 10 o'clock, defections gnawed at City Hall. Councillors slipped outside doors. Guards deserted. Even clerks fled, clutching ledgers. Half an hour later, Robes scratched out farewell notes, trembling script to his sister Charlotte, small instructions for his dog, Brown. Mundane lines from a man staring at execution. He signed each with full name and title, clinging to the illusion of power. Augustine paced like a trapped wolf. Sanger sat wordless. Cuthon murmured prayers, and Labat quietly checked his pistol. 5 men who once held France in their fists now waited for the knock of death. Soon after midnight, the convention soldiers stormed the Hôtel de Ville. Gunfire split the corridors. Robespierre crouched, with 20 loyalists behind makeshift barricades of desks and chairs, useless against muskballs, let alone cannon. Shots echoed through marble halls, boots pounded, screams rose. Attackers pressed from 3 sides. The commune's last defenders fired wildly, then scattered. Order shattered. Hope bled out. Midnight slid into July 28th. In the first hour after midnight, Labas put a pistol to his head and pulled the trigger. Better to die than be dragged to the scaffold. He slumped across a heap of proclamations and death warrants, blood soaking the very papers that once carried terror across France. The first of Robespierre's circle was gone. Minutes later, the doors burst inward. Soldiers flooded the room. Robespierre sat at a table, head in his hands. Some claimed he tried to end his own life, and the shot went wrong, shredding his jaw. Others swore a muskball found him. First, most likely it was a clumsy suicide. Robespierre was never a man for weapons. He lived by words, not steel, and the pistol had kicked wildly, tearing through his lower face instead of his brain. His brother Austinine hurled himself from a window, smashing both legs but surviving. Cuthon, crippled, was tossed down the staircase like a broken doll. Saint just yielded without a fight. 15 frantic minutes ended. The men who had ruled the terror. By 2 in the morning, Robespierre was carried through Paris on a stretcher, blood soaking the rags that bound his jaw. He could barely breathe. The architect of revolution reduced to a gasping ruin. People spilled from their homes, spitting, cursing, hurling stones. Word of his downfall swept the streets faster than fire. The tyrant bled like any other man, and citizens who had hidden in silence now dared to. At 3, an army surgeon examined the wound inside the Tuileries. The jaw was smashed in 3 places, teeth gone, tongue almost severed, but his brain untouched. Robespierre would live long enough to face the blade. They rinsed the gash with spirits, stitched the tongue, bound the jaw with torn linen. Crude field medicine for a man who once dined from gilded china. By candle light, guards watched the surgeon's every move. With dawn came July 28th. They placed him on a table inside the Committee of Public Safety, his own office where he had signed countless death orders. Now he lay there as the condemned. A filthy bandage held his jaw, one eye swollen shut, breath bubbling through blood. The irony was suffocating. This was the same room where he had plotted purges, scrolled names for the scaffold, sipped coffee over lists of the doomed. His desk still bristled with papers, his signature glaring from stacks of warrants. By mid-morning, Paris roared awake. Crowds swarmed every crossing, the news spreading like a lit fuse. Robespierre was captured. The tyrant had fallen. People danced, sang songs. Long band dragged out hidden bottles of wine. Bakers threw open shutters. Merchants raised their grates. Citizens stepped blinking into daylight after months underground. Yet the celebration felt brittle, as though too much joy might shatter it. Late in the morning, the trial began, more ritual than hearing. Fouquier Tinville, the prosecutor, barely skimmed the facts. Outly allowed no witnesses, no defense, only a nod to identity before the sentence. Robespierre tried to scroll notes, his hand trembling, but no one looked twice. His jaw hung useless. Words were no longer his weapon. Revolutionary justice moved fastest when its engineers stood accused. By noon, the timbre rattled to the gate. They lifted Robespierre in like freight. He couldn't sit straight, leaning against the rails as the assistant steadied him with almost gentle hands. Professional courtesy among men familiar with death. Months of strain had hollowed him. The terror had gnawed its creator to the bone. The crowd was immense, the largest in years. All of Paris had come to witness the fall of its tormentor. Women spat curses. Men waved rags strewn with blood. Children pitched garbage at the cart. The procession crept forward. Carnival of hate. Voices that once cheered his speeches now bayed for his life. Each jolt over the cobblestones sent new agony through his mangled jaw, and he kept his eyes closed, unconscious, perhaps, or simply ashamed. The cart rolled past his old lodgings on the Rousen Honor. For 4 years he had lived there, written speeches, plotted purges. Someone hurled a bucket of pig's blood at the windows. Red streaks crawled down like tears. Behind the curtain peered Dupe, the carpenter who had once sheltered him as a son. Friendship evaporated fast when the guillotine beckoned. By early afternoon, the streets swelled to a suffocating press. Maybe 20,000 packed shoulder to shoulder. Vendors hawked wine and bread. Pickpockets prowled. Death always drew trade. Ahead in the plaster evolution, the guillotine waited. The very machine Robespierre had elevated to statecraft. 15,000 voices thundered as he was dragged up the wooden stairs. Executioner Sanson tore the bandage from his jaw, and Robespierre let out a sound, not quite human, a ragged shriek that cut through the mob's roar. Then an eerie stillness settled as his head dropped into the lunette. Assistants pinned his limbs with brisk efficiency. Sanson checked the mechanism, calm and precise as ever. Robespierre's eyes opened suddenly clear. He looked at the crowd. The scarlet-stained boards, the poised blade, comprehension lit his face. The terror had claimed its own master. The blade fell. Paris erupted. Wild with release, people danced. Wine billed. Bells rang for the first time in months. Blood pulled in the straw, mingling with that of countless victims. The guillotine had claimed its most infamous prize. The man who fed it now nourished it one last time. By mid-afternoon, the square was cleared. Bodies heaped onto carts. Augustine Robespierre, Saint-Just, and 20 others. Baked beneath the sun, the leadership of the Terror was wiped out in one scorching session. Yet Paris kept drinking to their downfall past midnight. But Robbie's story didn't finish at the scaffold that afternoon. While the city roared with celebration, curious citizens crept toward his lodgings on the Rue Saint-Honore. They rummaged through drawers and cupboards, like carrying birds, hungry for keepsakes and secrets. Their first prize was the fabled green coat, the garment he wore for every thunderous speech as Paris bled, torn to ribbons on the spot. It changed from a tyrant's uniform into a souvenir for the bold. By 5:30 p.m., the true treasure hunt began. Officials sealed the apartment and started cataloging his possessions for the state. Ordinary procedure after an execution, but this inventory revealed the man behind the executioner's mask. Shelves groaned with books, philosophy, law, poetry. Rousseau annotated in tight handwriting volumes on Roman virtue and austere republics. His obsessions lay etched in underlines and dog-eared pages. At 6:15 p.m. they stumbled on his dog, Brown, locked in a back room, half starved and crying at the door. Robespierre, pitiless toward men, had fed that dog each morning with tender care. Debate flared. Should the beast share its master's fate? In the end, street sweeper gathered Brown in his arms and carried him away, the lone soul, to mourn the fallen leader. By 8:15 p.m., private papers surfaced, letters from Charlotte, receipts for candles and bread, careful household accounts. The so-called monster had lived like a minor clerk. Spartan meals, plain chairs, no indulgence beyond books. But in the deeper drawers lay correspondence from provincial agents, quiet reports, charting every district and notable figure. The incorruptible had watched an entire nation from his desk. Then, around 8:30 p.m., a shock. Citizen Courtois found a hidden compartment in the writing table, invisible unless you pressed a secret panel. Inside rested a list, 137 names penned in Robespierre's deliberate script, deputies marked for arrest and death on July 30th. It was a purge that would have dwarfed anything before. The first group, moderates who had questioned the pace of executions, men like Basset Danglas and Louina, Girondins who'd learned to bite their tongues. Silence hadn't spared them. The next, his own allies, Cuthan, Sunjouch, even Bearer, the voice of his propaganda. Last came magistrates, mayors, generals, loyal functionaries suddenly slated for the blade. Fidelity meant nothing once suspicion took root. By 9:15 p.m., investigators were sifting drafts of speeches designed to whip the convention into frenzy ahead of the mass purge. He planned to blame Austria's gold and British agents just as he had before, but now the accusations aimed to cleanse entire ministries, topple generals overnight, and replace provincial councils wholesale. France would awaken, either to a personal dictatorship or civil war. At 10:00 p.m., they opened his journal. 6 months of entries spiraled from certainty into dread. Enemies everywhere. Assassination lurking behind every knock. Even the high priest of virtue slept in fear, checking locks 3 times before bed. July entries became frantic, accusing half the assembly of treachery. The last line, dated July 26th, read, "Tomorrow I will speak the truth that virtue may triumph, or I will perish." Midnight neared. Paris still sang. Fountains ran with wine. Crowds shouted outlawed songs. The end of the terror felt like a national sigh. But candlelight burned on in the apartment as investigators pieced together a darker future that almost came to pass. What they uncovered showed no accident, no fevered impulse, but a blueprint, careful, methodical, timed destruction, a mechanism poised to strip the Republic bare and rebuild it in one man's image. Had the bullet at City Hall struck his brain instead of his jaw, had the convention stormed in minutes later, France might have woken inside that nightmare. On July 29th, the evidence was clear. Robespierre hadn't drifted into random killings. He had engineered a systematic decapitation of France's leadership. Military orders lay signed and ready, arrest warrants for victorious generals awaiting dispatch. If enacted, the army would have been headless. Foreign troops on the borders, free to march through chaos. 2:30 a.m. Letters from provincial emissaries deepened the scheme. Coded instructions, urging lists of suspects, guillotines, readied in every square. The terror was meant to swell far beyond Paris. Lyon, already punished for revolt, faced annihilation. Streets leveled, survivors scattered, the city itself erased. Then, at 4:05 a.m., financial ledgers delivered another blow. The Republic's coffers were empty, bled dry by foreign war and domestic repression, tax collection, paralyzed by dread. The paper trail painted a single conclusion. Had rogues Pierre survived, France would have stepped not into peace, but into an abyss without bottom. The Republic bled money faster than it could print as Robespierre's answer was chilling. Seize more estates from the condemned. Bankroll the state through legalized plunder. Each sentence of death meant another deposit in the treasury. Execution turned into fiscal policy. By 4:15 a.m., private letters sliced through the paper mountain. Charlotte begged her brother to stop the slaughter. Augustine confessed his doubts. Even inside the citadel of the terror, voices whispered against the tide of blood. Robespierre, increasingly alone, only stiffened. Later drafts show a man convinced that if others faltered, he would stand firm. Virtue demanded sacrifice. France had to be scoured clean. The incorruptible hardened into granite. Dawn, July 29th, 24 hours since his arrest. Paris counted its dead and searched for meaning. 17,000 lives had already fallen in just 14 months. Yet, the papers hinted at horrors still waiting in the wings. Around 5:30 a.m., investigators completed their final inventory. Robespierre's personal fortune amounted to 873 livres, less than a good craftsman earned yearly. The man who ruled the treasury lived poorer than many he condemned. Power without riches, devastation without gain. His treasures were modest, a handful of law books, inherited from his father, medals from revolutionary committees, a silver watch, presented by citizens after his first speeches, a life chained to austere ideals left only tokens behind. By 7:15 a.m., hundreds of documents sealed, catalogued, and spirited away to state archives where they would lie unseen for decades. But rumors leaked among deputies who had survived by a matter of hours and generals spared by a twist of timing. France, they realized, had been pulled back from an abyss by pure accident, a bullet that shattered a jaw instead of a brain, and 20 frantic minutes at City Hall. At 7:30 a.m., the larger truth settled like a weight. Robespierre's fall hadn't ended the terror through rebellion or coup. Ended because fortune intervened. One botched suicide, a short delay, and history veered off course. Without that chance, France would have plunged into slaughter, collapse, and invasion. The revolution might have devoured itself whole. 3 days later, archivists unlocked one last horror. Plans hidden in his desk for expanding the machinery of death. Multiple execution grounds across Paris. Steam-driven blades, engineered for relentless speed. Industrialized killing on a scale the world had never imagined. The man who once preached civic virtue had prepared to mechanize terror itself. If stories like these grip you, subscribe and let us know the city you're watching from. This account draws on Courtois' official report and the French National Archives, reviving the final hours of Robespierre in all their dreadful clarity.